कुतुब मीनार को किए तैयारी करथला? मुगल माने तैयारी करथिले।
सॉरी सर। अरे सुधरो रे, अभी तो सुधर जाओ।
आज ये वीडियो रे प्रूफ और वीडियो सहित जानिबा कुतुब मीनार को किए तैयारी करथिला। आम समस्त मुंडरे अच्छे आ जबरदस्ती आम हिस्ट्री रे लिखा जाइछि कुतुब मीनार को मुगल माने तैयारी करथिले। जहाँ देश रे झाड़ा बसिया पई गोटे लैट्रिन नथिला, सी आसिक आम देश रे कुतुब मीनार ताजमहल भलिया जो जिंस तैयारी करदेले। जदि एते शौक थला तैयारी करिवारे ताल कोन निज देश रे तैयारी कर पर न था, आसिक आमरी देश रे तैयारी करदेले। तबळे जो वंश मुगल तांकर वंश स्टार्ट ही नथला, आमर तार हजार वर्ष पूर्व माने एमितिया मंदिर आउ एमितिया आर्किटेक्चर रे सब टेक्नोलोजी रे सब तैयारी हितला। एबे भी साइंस जानि पारनी, ये आसिक आम देश रे सब तैयारी करदेले। हमको जबरदस्ती पढ़ा जाउची मुगल माने आसिक आम देश रे सब एमितिया सब जिंस तैयारी करदेले। वाह
क्या सीन है।
ए वीडियो गोटे रिएक्शन वीडियो हो, चलंतो ए वीडियो देखिकरी जानिबा डिटेल्स रे कुतुब मीनार विषय रे।
Hey guys, I'm at this brilliant monument called Qutub Minar. Historians say that this tower was built by a Muslim ruler called Qutb al-Din Aybak, also known as Qutbuddin, about 800 years ago. This site is recognized as a UNESCO World Heritage Site because it is full of Islamic structures like India's first mosque, the Qutub Minar, and tombs of famous Mughal kings. However, were these structures really built by Muslim kings? Now, let's take a good look at these structures. They are definitely Islamic structures. You can see the domes on top, verses of Quran in Arabic carved on the walls, and typical Mughal designs all over the structure. There should be absolutely no doubt in your mind that these were built by Muslim rulers. But let's take a look at this unfinished structure nearby. Here you can see how a dome has been constructed on top, but it's not finished. Below this dome, you can see that the pillars look very similar to the pillars of a Hindu temple. You can see typical temple bells.
एटा जोंडा भांगी जाइछि तैयारी हेनी आर पूरा हिंदू टेंपल भलिया पूरा डिटो एटा।
If we can find more evidence. Here we can see the defaced carving of Lord Ganesh.
एटी हिंदू गॉड मानकर स्टैचू भी ऑलरेडी अछि, किंतु एटा जोंडा तैयारी हेछि एटा फिनिश भी हेनी।
In the Qutub Minar complex built by Islamic rulers. On the top you can even see the war scene from the Hindu epic Ramayana. Remember, carvings of God, saints or human beings are completely prohibited in Islam, so this is absolutely not an Islamic structure. In fact, we can see many carvings of Indian gods that have been disfigured in this site. Here you can even see the Hindu religious altar called Balipidam. Now let's go back and take a look at the big picture. On the left is the Jama Masjid, which is hailed as India's very first mosque built by Islamic rulers. On the right is a Hindu temple on top of which an Islamic dome has been built. The only difference between the left and right photographs is that the structure on the right was not finished by Muslim kings. Had the dome been finished, pillars been polished to remove the carvings, the walls been covered with new plaster and Islamic designs and verses written on the walls, you would believe that this was also completely built by Islamic rulers. Both these pictures were taken at the site of Qutub Minar complex. They are only a few hundred feet apart. Walking through various structures of this complex, I realized that if you don't see the dome from the outside, you would think this is a Hindu temple, because it is a Hindu temple that's merely been converted for religious convenience. Islamic rulers did not even take the time to demolish the ancient temples.
फास्ट एटा गोटे हिंदू टेंपल थिला, तार स्ट्रक्चर भी ऑलरेडी हिंदू ईयर भी अछि, तापर ताको डिमोलिश करी करी तैयारी हेछि।
Simple changes to the existing temples and rename them as Islamic structures. This is evident when you see that the dome on top looks completely different from the rest of the structure. This wouldn't be the case if they reused the materials from demolished temples. They simply constructed a new dome with a different material on top of the existing Hindu temple and defaced the walls which had carvings of various gods. This is confirmed when you look at the ceiling from the inside of the
आम मंदिर ऊपर साइड सब जेम था पूरा डिटो देखो से भाया ऊपर नगे नहीं इस्लामिक स्ट्रक्चर भाया बास होगला आमर आम तैयारी करदेलु होगला तांकर.
All these evidences clearly prove that the structures around this brilliant tower were in fact Hindu monuments. But what about the tower itself? Was Qutub Minar the most important piece of this complex, built by Muslim kings? To understand this, we must understand why the Qutub Minar was built. Why was this structure built to a stupendous height of 240 feet? I mean, what is the purpose of the structure? The main reason given by historians is that this was used as a minaret, a place where a man could stand on top and call the locals to come to the mosque for prayer. But there are many problems with this theory. Why did the minaret get all the beautiful decorations while the mosque, which is the main building, is almost in ruins? The entrance of Islamic minarets must face east, but the Qutub Minar's entrance faces north.
कुतुब मीनार जो फेसटा अच्छी पूरा ईस्ट के अच्छी माने पूर्व दिगु तांकर तो बुद्धि न तो पूर्व दिगु करियो केमति.
But in more than 45 minutes. How did anyone climb up and down 5 times a day? Assuming you do this, the tower is so tall that even if you shout at the top of your lungs, nobody in the ground can hear you. The sound you make from that height actually gets dissipated and dispersed, failing to reach the people on the ground. You would need a mic to be heard from such a height, and microphones didn't exist 800 years ago.
कौन जावे तार माने कोठी जितिक तार विक्ट्री आउ ता पावर को सेलिब्रेट करिया पे एटा गोटे तयारी हिंची एथरे कुआ जाउची एटा तयारी हिंतला एथि पई जणे 240 फुट ऊपर हेलानी जणे 5 थर दिन को चढ़ी जीव ऊपर जाइकी ठिया होकर डाक माने डाक कौन पाई ना सब लोक आसिक ठिया होकर प्रेयर करेंगे जो ठाकुर को डाकते से प्रेयर करेंगे डाक एत फुट ऊपर जब गोटे माइक्रे भी जब से फास्ट कथा से माइक नाला जब गोटे माइक्रे भी डाक ना से भी आसिक ठीक से शुभिबनी निजे.
There should be some inscription on the structure that bears his name. After all, historians say that this tower is the best achievement of him in his lifetime.
Achha.
However, Qutbuddin's name is not inscribed anywhere on this tower.
अच्छा तार से तैयारी करछि तार जत सब अचीवमेंट हेरिका पाइछि बोली ता पे गोटे तैयारी हेछि जतक सब लिखा जाइए अरबिक लिखा जाइए ता वर्ड भी माने ता नार वर्ड कोठी गोटे मेंशन भी हेनी.
If Qutbuddin constructed Asia's tallest stone structure at that time and built it as a symbol of his power, why did he not have his name carved on it?
सबुठ मजा कथा हला जदि जणे जदि कहबो मु एशिया रो सबुठ लॉन्गेस्ट गोटे तैयारी करी जोटा कुतुब मीनार मु तैयारी करी ताले तार निज ना कम पई लिखिबनी एते जिंस सब लिखा जाय छि तार निज ना कम पई नाही तार से.
Not to mention that watchtowers don't have to be superbly decorated and covered with verses of Quran. In fact, most of the tourists who visit this site are completely unsatisfied with these explanations as to why the Qutub Minar was built. To this day, the question of why Qutub Minar was built is quite popular on Google. The other baffling question is this: how was Qutbuddin able to build such a grand tower? All historians agree that he ruled this place for just 4 years. How did Qutbuddin, who couldn't even build these smaller structures and merely dress them up as Islamic structures, manage to build this breathtaking monument within just 4 years. Imagine the time when Qutbuddin first reached this place. This place was totally filled with ancient Hindu structures. The Qutub Minar is still completely surrounded at the base by these demolished Hindu monuments. Did the ancient Hindu builders leave an empty space of 50 feet diameter exactly in the center of the complex so that Qutbuddin can come centuries later and conveniently build the Qutub Minar? What's more interesting is that the term Qutub Minar itself must have been coined in the 1800s to attribute the tower to King Qutbuddin, because the term Qutub Minar does not appear in any historical document before the last 2 centuries. Nowadays, many historians are spinning theories that it took many centuries to build the tower and different levels were built by different kings. This is a joke because this kind of extremely tall structures need a deep foundation, otherwise the entire structure will just crumble down. Think about this. If the first Mughal king only wanted to build one level, he would have only created a shallow foundation. Another king who decided to build the next 2 levels cannot just go back and deepen the foundation. He must simply demolish this and start from scratch. This is like saying the Empire State Building was initially built as a single-story house, and eventually people just built multiple floors on top of the house. These kind of structures must be planned and built from start to finish, otherwise they will just collapse like a house of cards. All these evidences mean that this tower was built as an integral part of the Hindu temple complex, constructed much before the time of Muslim kings. Ironically, the very first paper published that Qutub Minar is a Hindu monument was put forward by a Muslim archaeologist by the name of Syed Ahmed Khan in 1852. In his paper, Athar-us-Sanadid, he states many reasons as to why this is a Hindu structure. When we casually look at Qutub Minar, it does look like a Muslim monument because it is covered with verses of Quran in Arabic. However, if you observe the walls carefully, you can see that Hindu carvings appear all over the place. Here you can see the patterns of bells and chains, which are Hindu symbols. This is confirmed when you can see the exact same design of bells and chains on the damaged Hindu temples in the same complex. This means that the tower was built around the same time as the ancient Hindu temples and not by the Islamic kings who arrived much later in time. Now, let's take a step back and look at it from a different angle. Is it possible that the Islamic kings simply liked this design and asked the local builders to reproduce them on the Qutub Minar? Bells are actually forbidden in Islam because Prophet Muhammad has said that. The bell is one of the musical instruments of Satan. There is no way that any Muslim king would ask his workers to carve bells on an Islamic monument. On the contrary, it is a well-known fact that Hindus use bells in all their temples. In fact, these type of melodious bells and chains are hung in many Hindu homes even today as a religious symbol. This proves that Qutub Minar was in fact a Hindu monument that was merely dressed up as an Islamic structure, just like how the other temples were turned into Islamic buildings. The Arabic verses were simply added much later in time to make it look like a Muslim monument. Syed Ahmed Khan, who was an expert on Arabic, says that many of the Arabic verses on the tower have wrong spelling and grammar and make no sense. Add added in a
ସେ ଆରବିକ୍ ଇଏରେ ଯାହା ସେଟା ଲେଖା ହେଇଛି ସେ ବି ନିଜେ ବୁଝି ହେଉନି ସବୁ ଭୁଲ ଭାଲ ଲେଖା ହେଇଛି
just like the disfiguring of the other temple's walls. The entrance of the Qutub Minar faces perfectly to the north, just like most ancient Hindu temples. The Muslim kings at that time would not have guessed that people today can examine the walls with binoculars and zoom lenses, so they did not bother to disfigure smaller carvings. There are patterns of lotus flowers carved all over the walls of the tower, which is a sacred Hindu symbol. Islamic invaders could not have used them because lotus flowers simply do not grow in places where they came from. These large Arabic verses are eye-catching, but if you observe closely, they have been added on top of Hindu designs of lotus buds. Not to mention that the Qutub Minar is made of the exact same material that the ancient temples are made of. All these evidences prove that the so-called Qutub Minar was in fact an ancient Hindu structure that existed much before the arrival of Islam in India. However, this is not the end, but just a beginning. Name of the tower.
ओरिजिनल नेम ऑफ द टावर केमिति जण मिलिबो से जो चोर गुराक आस्तेले सब जाक भांगिकी तैयारी करके निजर हिस्ट्री लिखिकी पळै जंदी ओरिजिनल जहाँ तो ताको तो निजे पैटर करी खाई देथिबे नल से कुतुब मीनार ता तळे पोति देथिबे आ किया उपाय एटी प्रॉब्लम कोन मु कहूची जेते भी जिंस से माने सब भांगी जदी हिंदू मंदिर हो जहाँ भी हो ये कुतुब मीनार भी हो आर फास्ट जो बेसिक जो स्ट्रक्चर जेमति सब स्टार्ट हेछि जेमति कि सब वीडियो आप सब देखिले जहाँ भी तार जो स्ट्रक्चर एठी गोटे जिनस बुझियार है जिते भी हिंदू मंदिर भांगी कि ये सब ताजमहल हो गला कि कुतुब मीनार हो गला आर बेसिक स्ट्रक्चर सब जो देखिए जहाँ भी स्ट्रक्चर हिंदू गॉडर अच्छी बेल अच्छी फ्लावर अच्छी जोटा कि धर्म में सब जिनस रहा कथा नुह से जिनस सब रही हाँ यहाँ है पाखे तो एमती माने आर्किटेक्चर हेरिका टोटाल किसी ना सब जाक मूर्ख तो सी तापर कौन कर जिनस को देखिकी जिते शासन जो करते निजे जबरदस्ती निज ना लिखिदेले आम यहाँ तैयारी करपर कि आमरी किसी शिल्पी हो आमर कारीगर हो नहीं जबरदस्ती आउ कि तैयारी कर देथे आगे किसी इस्लामिक इयर किसी सेप दे देते ना कौन जना पड़ो जे आपको से ही तैयारी कर